on completion of his studies, he has to return to Seychelles and work. So I think it was on a 1-for-1 at that time. 1 year, 1-for-1 policy at that time. And if you fail to return, then your guarantor is requested to reimburse the amount of money. And then I don't know the discussion which happens at that time. I had left the ministry, and that was handled by Mrs. Willy.
Yeah. And can I ask you, so would the bond agreement state how much you had to pay back this? If you don't come back, this education is costing this amount of money, so you must pay that amount of money. Did it specify the cost?
I remember the
money. Did it specify the cost?
I remember the earlier bonding agreement did not state. Later bonding agreement gave, I think it gave a cost. But what happened when a candidate failed to return? The British government, the British Council at that time, is requested to provide a breakdown of the expenses incurred. And that is the amount which is used to ask the guarantor for repayment.
Okay, so the scholarship from the British government is seen as money for the Seychelles government. Yes. So if you benefit from the scholarship, you have to pay it back to the government if you don't come back.
The same applicable to any scholarship given by Russia, by the USSR at that time, by the French government.
And when you were in your position with the Ministry of Education, were there cases where land, or, someone bonded their land?
Dr. Najon Delétan was doing his postgraduate PhD in Paris, in France. And he was not ready, he did not return to Seychelles at that time. He offered his land as a total cost. It was not acquired. He offered his land, the land was transferred to the government, and both parties agreed to that. That was the only case I remember where land was exchanged to meet the obligation of the bonding agreement.
And it was normal to bond your property, was it, for these scholarships?
Normally you are, during my time, before you sign a bonding agreement, you have to make a declaration of your assets. There's a form you fill in, you state it, if you have a car or whatever, if you have property, you stated on that form your asset. And then a bonding agreement was prepared and signed by the guarantor and the candidate.
So there's only one case that you're aware of.
I remember one case.
One
case. When
case.
land was transferred.
Yeah, and that was an agreement. Both parties agreed. Yeah. I mean, in this case, the complainant says that, the land was sold, but there was no money. I mean, it was acquired in the national interest, but no money was given. So
if
they
it was acquired, it doesn't look to be part of the bonding agreement. If it was that the land was acquired, that is done by the Ministry of Land, National Development at that time, responsible for land. But when it comes to the bonding agreement itself, the guarantor has to agree. If there's land to be offered for the training expenses, the guarantor has to agree and transfer the land. In that case, it seems that the property was acquired.
I mean, the documents show that the property was acquired in the national interest, but the complaint is that the mother, Mrs. Michaud, was forced to agree to this acquisition on the basis that her son had failed, wasn't going to come back after his scholarship, and so therefore the property was acquired to remedy that failure on the part of her son.
When a property is acquired, it is acquired. You don't have to agree. It is taken over from you in the national interest. That's what I understand of compulsory acquisition. Basically, there's a property, the government wants to acquire it in the national interest. Sometimes they say the national interest is in the public interest, that's what they say, and they acquire. And a lot of persons, the property have been acquired, and you are not, you have no say at all. It's a compulsory acquisition. Whereas, if it was a case of meeting the costs, using the land to meet the cost of the bonding agreement, you don't need compulsory acquisition for that. The guarantor would agree with the government in exchange, in repayment of the debt due as a result of the trading. The land is offered, and that's it.
But so if the land was acquired, that's a different thing from taking the land.
Yeah.
But you do remember Mrs. Michaud being asked to pay the money, not being able to pay the money, discussion being had with respect to how to proceed, and then you left.
No,
and then
you see, at that time, Mr. Michaud had not returned to fulfill the terms of his bonding agreement. And the next steps you do, you ask the guarantor. The guarantor, at that time, what I remember during my time, the guarantor was asked to repay the trading expenses. And then I left sometime in June, I think. I took a leave, and then I went overseas. And surely my successor, I think, took over and dealt with this. You know, I'm not privy. I don't know, in fact, about the negotiation between Mrs. Belwy and Mrs. Michaud. I had left already.
okay.
While you were in the Ministry of Education, you mentioned the case of Dr. Nazar de l'Étang, where the land was voluntarily ceded. But were there other cases where the student, the candidate, did not come back and the guarantor was required to pay back? Not necessarily their land taken, but pay back in cash, for instance.
Yes, I mean, there are students, at that time, you know, the percentage of of students not coming back. And there were some, I think it was about 5% at that time. But sometimes the student would not return, the candidate would not return on completion of his study, but would return later. In the case of student not returning, then we asked the guarantor to pay. And I remember there were agreement reached with certain guarantor to repay even by installment.
And when someone paid because they didn't want to come back, was that money then used to give someone else a scholarship, or?
No, it goes into government revenue,
Okay.
Consolidated fund. Yeah.
And in instances where it wasn't paid, what happened?
There's a procedure. If the candidate or the guarantor do not pay, then you have to take him or her to court to settle to meet the terms of the bonding agreement.
And that happened?
I think yes. I remember there were some taken, but normally they came back and negotiate. But during my time, you know, that was, I mean, I remember there were some who did not return, but most of them were still following, asking them to return, talking to the parents, you know, because when you go on a scholarship, okay, even if you are required to sign a guarantor and fill in a form of asset, some also, they do not have anything, and we cannot deprive of those who with lower or with no income of a scholarship. But what happened is that we used the guarantor to influence the candidate to return to Seychelles. You have cases of some also candidates saying that I'm getting some experience. I would return to Seychelles later. But it happened. Quite a lot of candidates return later.
How much later was acceptable?
2, 3 years.
2, 3 years.
4 years.
Okay.
But the HRDC can give you much more active, up-to-date information on the trend,
So if I had nothing, no assets, yeah, I'm super smart and I get a scholarship.
Yeah.
If I don't have anything to bond myself to, could I still get the scholarship and go?
Yes,
I could go.
Yeah.
So the asset register would determine whether or not I have to be bonded. Would I still have?
They are all
yeah.
bonded. They are all bonded.
But what if I don't have anything?
No, still you will be bonded.
What would I be bonded to?
No, to return to work, to return and work in Seychelles.
Okay, but if I refuse to do that, what could you do to me?
Then it's not possible. It has never happened.
People came back.
No.
Okay. So you have no knowledge of there being a desire to take the land from Mrs. Michaud, her not being given the option to pay, because the complaint is and the complaint is that she offered to pay, and that she was told, no, we want the land. That's what you bonded to, the land, and we want the land, and that she wasn't given the option to pay. But you recall that she was given the option to pay.
Yes, she was requested to pay. And then when I left, they were still waiting for a response from Mrs. Michaud. As I said earlier, the actual negotiation of the meeting, conversation with Mrs. Michaud was done by my successor.
Would you have any recollection? I know it's a very long time ago, of like how much money would have to be repaid for someone studying medicine in the UK at that time?
Bit difficult to say, but I would imagine a medical course, 7. He specialized as well. Specialized, there's not much expenses involved, but it should be about 300 to 4,100 rupees a year, 400,000 rupees a year.
300,000 a year.
For 400,000 a year at that time, I would say. But I think they should have the file in the Ministry of Education, and there should be should be record on the expenses incurred in respect of the training.
We haven't had much luck with accessing files anywhere, but we will try to find this one.
As I recall, when the responsibility for overseas training was taken over by HRDC, all the files, I think, were transferred to them. And also, in certain cases, the file was sent to the National Archive. So you should be able to get hold of the file, 32 years ago.
How long were you away for on that study course?
2 years. 2 years. 2 years.
And when you came back, you were different. You went to a different ministry or the same ministry?
No, I went to the postgraduate training in public administration, and when I returned, I was posted elsewhere at the Seychelles Licensing Authority.
So you had no reason to find out anything further about that case?
No. You know, when you leave, I know if some of you have worked in government departments, when you leave the government, you can't take any documents. You hand over the documents. You move further onwards. And when I received the letter, I look at it. I started, making recollection of what happened. You see. But whoever will testify, obviously, in the Ministry of Land Use, and will tell you some more details. But at that time, we had not reached the stage of finalizing what should be paid in terms of the amount that should be paid for non-compliance with the bonding agreement.
Did you meet personally with Mrs. Michaud?
I think I saw her once. In fact, Mrs. Michaud, I met her more personally several times, but it was different matter, you see.
But at the time when you met her over this question,
I think once I met her about the repayment of the training.
did you feel that she was willing to make good the cost? That she was
She
willing?
wasn't happy. She was not happy.
But was she prepared to pay the?
She did not indicate that.
When you met with her, she was not happy. Was she not happy because her son wasn't coming back, so she would have to pay? Or was it already being discussed that maybe the land would be taken?
No, the land, during my time, the land issue was not yet raised, during my time, it was a question of the repayment of the expenses. Once you get a copy, the complainant should have also filed a copy of the bonding agreement. Once you see the bonding agreement, you would see there's nothing to do with land at all. It's the expenses incurred in respect of the training. Then, of course, if the person cannot pay or wants to make alternative arrangement, if she has a car, land, to offer that to offset the training expenses, that's another matter which was dealt with by my successor.
Which year did you leave to go on your studies?
I think I said in 1985, I think. June, I think. So sometime in June. I took leave first, and then I went in September.
Of 1985.
Yeah. But as I said, if the land was acquired, there's nothing to do with that. Compulsory acquisition of land is a separate matter, and normally it is acquired by the ministry concerned upon notice for the use of the land for public purposes. Scholarship was within the responsibility of the Ministry of Education and Information at that time.
I note here that you say you left in 85. The land was acquired, you left in June 85, the land was acquired in July 88. Do you think negotiations would have been going on for 3 years?
No, I remember, but some time. You write to the candidate or the guarantor. It takes some time, you know. No, I left in June 1988.
You left in June
1988,
88.
yeah.
So that's only 1 month
Yeah.
before the land
Yeah,
was acquired.
Yeah. Not 85, huh?
And that sounds a bit more like
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. We will try our utmost to locate that file. We would now like to move to case 002. And in that case, Mr. Betsy had he was arrested and incarcerated, and when he got out of jail without charge, I think at the President's pleasure, he went back to his place of employment and he received a letter a few days later advising of the termination of his employment. That letter was dated 17th of March 1980, which I hope you received a copy of that letter, yes. Yeah. I mean, the Commission would just appreciate hearing from you any evidence you may be able to provide as to why Mr. Betsy's employment was terminated at that time, because part of his case is unlawful termination of employment. Thank you.
Yes, as I remembered, in fact, I was working this time in the Department of Public Administration as a senior assistant secretary. And I was in charge of responsible for planning and development personnel policies and the application, including appointments, promotions, and termination of appointments. In fact, I was the assistant to the principal secretary at that time. The principal secretary was Mr. Ian Mackinson. When Mr. Betsy was, I think what I remember is that Mr. Betsy was arrested and imprisoned. He was working at the time in the government printing department. Then after his arrest, the principal secretary, Mr. Ian Mackinson, suspended him from duty. I think all those who were arrested at that time and in prisons, then they were suspended. I think between 1st December 1979 to 19 February 1980, as a result of being detained by the authorities, then I was instructed, I was given a directive to terminate his appointment. In fact, there was a recommendation made by the head of the government printing department at that time and the under secretary at that time, which recommended that his appointment been terminated. We discussed this. When we say we, Mr. Mackinson and myself, we discussed this recommendation, and we were told that the authorities concerned at that time no longer have any trust and confidence in Mr. Betsy as an employee. So since the power to appoint, terminate, promote rests with the President of the Republic of Seychelles, the matter was referred to the President. And then instruction was given that Mr. Betsy's appointment should be terminated. And hence I wrote that letter. It is clearly stated that I, as a public servant, have to follow instruction, and I use the word I am directed. So that is why Mr. Betsy, this is how Mr. Betsy appointment was terminated.
I ask, so the recommendation was made by the head of the printing department and the principal secretary. Did I get that right?
Yes. In fact, I was dealing with that dossier. The file was sent to me after the principal secretary, Mr. Ian Mackinson, had suspended him. At that time, he was being detained. Then the file came back to me 2 or 3 months after. Then, on what to do. Somebody cannot remain under suspension forever. So I remember I wrote to the government printer at that time, who was Mr. Rigopal, and the Undersecretary, Mrs. Sheila Gemel, asking him what to do, whether you wish to continue with the suspension or not. It is then that we received the recommendation from the government printer and Mrs. Gemel, acting for principal secretary, to terminate the appointment. Since we don't have the power to terminate appointments, the matter was referred to the President of Seychelles, who has the power, and then he decided that Mr. Betsy's appointment should be terminated, and we should act accordingly.
A decision was made that his employment should be terminated because he'd been arrested for no reason that he was given, except for he voiced concerns against the nationalisation of football, I think was his evidence. And then Mr. Pillay at once put to him that he'd had some involvement in some pamphlets, so no longer had trust and confidence that he could print things.
Yeah, that was what I was told. In fact, we discussed with, at that time it was Mr. Ian Mackinson. We discussed, and he told me that they've lost confidence in him.
But it wasn't in, I mean, he'd been 9 years there, so it wasn't a loss of confidence in his ability to perform his functions, was it? Was it a loss of confidence in his loyalty to the government that he was working for as a public servant?
No, that's
or
what he told me, loss of confidence. It must be as a result of
the arrest,
his detention and so on. But I wish to point out also, I remember from the record, you made me to think a lot. I remember that after June 5th, June 1977, Mr. Betsy was promoted also. Yeah, he was promoted.
yeah, so that's why he was so shocked when he was then
he was promoted.
arrested and terminated.
Yeah.
No, I think we understand that you were just a messenger, effectively delivering the message of the decision that had been taken,
Yes.
and the person that ultimately took that decision was the president.
Yeah, it's clear from the record.
Yeah.
I think you'll be able to find the record.
Where would we find that record?
Try and ask the Department of Public Administration.
Public Administration. Thank you.
But I think he was paid. What I remember also, he was paid. He claimed for his gratuity under the Seychelles Pension Act. I think he was not entitled to a pension at the time. but he was granted a lump sum payment as a gratuity.
So, in that job that you had,
Yeah.
was there many terminations of employment of people that had been arrested for no reason?
I think most of them.
They were terminated,
Yeah.
yeah. Because there was a loss. And that would always be a decision ultimately taken by the president.
Yes. Yeah, the president has the power to appoint. To appoint.
Really? He had.
He has the power,
Ah.
the executive power, to appoint, to promote. And at times he delegates the power of appointment for junior posts to the minister.
So the promotion Mr. Betsy received would have had to be approved by the president as well.
Yes, I think. Yeah, it will have to go to the president, yeah. At that time, it was all centralized. Later, it was delegated to the certain level. It was delegated to the minister because obviously, if it was not delegated, then he would not be able to do all the work. It would be too much for him.
The instructions which came to you, did they have anything justifying the decision? You say in the case of Mr. Betsy, it's loss of confidence.
Yeah, I asked. When there was a list of civil servants at that time, we called them, who were arrested and detained. And after 2 or 3 months, then we were instructed to terminate their appointments.
That's what I'm
And
trying.
at that time, when they terminate your appointment, it's not like today or yesterday. At that time, today, yesterday, you have to give reasons in accordance with the Employment Act. But in the past, it was the PSO, Public Service Order, which gives the power to terminate, and you don't have to give reasons at that time. You've heard of the General Order. At that time, there was a set of instruction on terms and conditions of service. Then that was used during the colonial time and shortly after the independence. Then, after independence, they turned it into what we call the PSO, Public Service Orders. It regulates your appointment, condition, dismissal, and all the conduct that you have to follow in the public service. In UK, they did call this a code.
Well, let's come back to Seychelles. You said there was a list of civil servants who were arrested, detained, and eventually terminated. Where did that list originate? Where did it come from?
It came from the principal secretary. I saw that list from the principal secretary at the time.
Principal secretary to...
No, the list was written by... I knew of the list when the principal secretary wrote to all of them, listing their names, that they were suspended.
Okay.
Yeah.
And no reasons
No.
were given to people for I mean, the public service generally, in that sort of climate, did people fear that they would be next, arrested, suspended, terminated? Did you ever think you could be arrested, suspended, terminated?
You see, I don't know if you know the concept of a single party.
Not very well.
The concept. Either you are with us or not.
Either you're with us
Or not.
or not. And if you're not,
Then
you're terminated,
you may,
arrested, terminated.
Not all.
No, not all.
If you keep quiet, shouldn't be any problem.
Okay, so you were with them. You kept quiet.
No, I was there to do.
Just did your job.
I
Yeah.
started work during the colonial time. You see, I am one of the few people still alive who work for all the government, including the colonial governments. 10 years colonial administration, then first, second, third, until 2017. Yeah?
So are you retired now? You're not retired?
I'm retired, yeah. I retired.
Because you actually look quite young. So I was sort of surprised that you had this job at that time. Right?
Yeah, I
You must-
retired.
yeah.
I retired in February 2017 at the age of 65.
65 is young, I think.
Yeah.
for
But the retirement age here is 63.
That's very young, at
Yeah.
63.
So you say no reasons were given. You were just given a file, a name, terminate this one.
No, before we terminate, as I said to you earlier, they were suspended. There is what we call, in the filing system, there is what we call the BU, bring up. Once after 2 months, you bring up the file. Then you see that these people are still, we're talking in particular the case of Mr. Betsy. He was still suspended. So we wrote to the department, ministries concerned, what to do. You want these people suspended or what? Then there was a recommendation made at the time by the head of department and the ministry also overseeing the department to terminate the appointment of. Then I went to inquire from, at that time, Mr. Mackinson, why. He told me that the authorities, they've lost confidence, trust and confidence.
I think I understand
Yeah,
now. Trust
yeah.
and confidence means you're with us, right?
Probably
Yeah.
it all depends on what happened to why Mr. Betsy was arrested, or even under suspicion.
We don't know. We
Why?
Don't,
And if he was, I think he said that he was involved with the print. He said in his, I've heard it over the radio, over the TV, that he was involved with the publication of a newspaper. I don't know.
No, I think his evidence was he opposed the football, the nationalisation of
And
the football.
then he was accused of
Yeah.
helping with the public. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
Mr.
heard-
Pillay, I think, told him when he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
incarcerated whether he knew anything about a leaflet that was going around, which he denied knowing about at all. So I'm just wondering, we've heard evidence from some witnesses that, people were like listening in on you and spying on you. I mean, would those measures, in your experience, be taken to work out whether somebody was with you or not?
No, you wouldn't know. Because if people were listening to you, you wouldn't know. Probably something happened, and then you can put 1 and 2 together and add up. You wouldn't know if...
How was it determined whether you were with them or not with them?
No, I don't know about that, but surely, as a civil servant, I did my work, to the best of my ability.
Well,
Yeah.
I wasn't talking about you personally. I was just thinking, you said there was a list in whom
No, that list was those who
had been arrested.
had been arrested.
And they had been arrested because they were not with
No,
the party.
No, at that time, as you may recall, those people were arrested. It was said that for anti-government activities, but we don't know. At that time, those were arrested and imprisoned for some time.
Did anyone get reinstated in that list, in that group? Did anyone get their job back?
Well, I would not. I think there are some, but I would not remember exactly what. But they were not all. What I
all
know,
government
they were
employees.
not all exiled because some of these people, remain in Seychelles and work. They were not all to go into exile because
But
you have.
if they were all arrested for anti-government activities, were there any incidents of anti-government activities which
No,
were found?
No.
There were no anti-government
No, at that
activities?
time, as a civil servant, I work, I do my work,
Sounds like a sensible approach,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think. Thank you. Now we'll move to case 001. And this one, I mean, it just shows what a long career you've had. The Commission, so we were trying to find out about the Liberation Memorial Fund that was established by Decree number 24 of 1977. And we had a witness here, Marcus Simeon, and he couldn't really tell us much. But then he managed to tell us afterwards that somebody had called him and said that you were actually the first secretary of that fund. And you might be able to tell us how that fund was administered. And of particular interest to us is what compensation, if any, was paid to the family of Dorothy Chang Him from that fund. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I was not the secretary as such. I would say that I was the de facto secretary because I was never appointed as secretary of the Liberation Memorial Fund. But I was asked by, at that time, Mr. James Michel was the Minister for Administration. I was asked by him to help him with the management of the fund.
I'm sorry, Mr. James Michel,
Oh, yes.
the Commissioner of Police?
James.
Ah,
Michel.
Michel, sorry.
Pillay was the Commissioner of Police. Yeah. He was the Minister for Public Administration and and he asked me to help him with the management of the administration of the fund. The Seychelles Liberation Fund, as you would see from the Act, it was established to assist, maintain, to maintain Francis Rachel, Bernard Jani, and Davidson Chang Him. Then also for the maintenance of the relatives of Freddy Lalonde. Freddy Lalonde was a soldier who was killed in the SPDF at that time when SPDF has just been established. Okay?
Do you know how he was killed? Was it an accident or?
Yeah, an accident. He was shot, I think. Yeah. That fund was to help the children and their spouse. The fund was set up, I think, Mr. James Michel at that time was the chairman of the fund. And I was requested to compile a list of the children of Mr. Davidson Chang Him, Bera Jani, and Francis Russell and Freddy Lalonde. So I went to see their relatives, and compiled the list. That is the children, and the children who are wholly or partially, wholly or substantially maintained by the foreigner. The list was prepared, was sent to Mr. Michel at the time, and a pension was approved for each of them. I think 400, 500 rupees up to 800 rupees, depending on the number. I'm not sure about the exact amount.
Was that for each individual child?
Yes,
or?
yes.
Okay.
They were given a pension at that time. And when I left in June 1988, they were still getting the pension. The fund received, I think, we received the fund from the SPDF and through public donation. And I think I remember some of the funds were invested also in bonds, fixed deposit, to be able to get the interest to continue to pay for the pension. There were books, files, and when I left, I handed over, I think the files were handed over to the Ministry of Finance to continue to maintain the accounts, the record. But how much was paid, that was determined by the board, and I dealt with Minister, at that time it was Minister Michel.
So you identified the children, a pension was approved for each of them,
Yeah.
and it was, you know for a fact that it was given to them at that time?
Yeah, it was paid to them every month, yeah.
How was it paid? Did they have to come up, or the parents came to collect it, or?
First, I think we had to pay, and then it was made arrangement were paid to them every month. Yeah.
Yeah, but paid how? They had to come and get a check or cash or?
Yeah, cash check. And then I think they made a standing order, I remember.
Because
I can tell you those people who are getting pension. Anne Woslin, for example, the wife of Francis Russell was getting a pension. There was a child also, and Chang Him's son were getting a pension as well. Because I went to them and saw them and make the list. And I think it's all recorded in the books, in the accounts, the file. The problem is that you have to find the files.
the files is the endless problem. Because, I mean, the Dorothy Chang Him and Wallen Adrian and Marilyn Chang Him, they say that they never received any money. And when Marcus was here, his file only started from 1999, and he had a list of beneficiaries, and their names were not on that list.
They were paid until the age of 18, or until the age of 18.
Okay, so it ended at the age of 18.
At that time, they were small. They were very young. I remember. It was paid, not direct to them, to the mother. Paid, and that was paid until they attain the age of, I think, 18, or when they are when 18, when they reach the adulthood. But there should be records, because I remember sending the records, giving all the records it was given to the Ministry of Finance. There was
Mr. Payette told us that the records were at State House, I believe, and that he would try and access that file. Is that right, Michael? Commissioner Green?
Yeah, Mr. Brigadier Leopold Payette said the files were at State House, and there is a statement that he had to authorize the payments. How did that come about?
No, I think he was part of a member of the Board of Trustees.
Do you remember the other members? You said James Michel.
No, I dealt directly with Minister Michel at the time, but I think Mr. Payette was a member of the Board of Trustees of the fund. But I was not involved in the meeting. I did not attend the meeting. I was just given this to do by the minister.
As you say, you were just used as a secretary, but without the authority.
But the
of
law
secretary.
says there's a board of trustees, you know. The law, I mean, if you look
Yeah.
at the act, it says there shall be established a board of trustees of not less than 3%.
We were looking for them. I think we ended up identifying who they were, the three people.
We have tried to identify the board, but since we are still waiting.
Yeah. Sort of an ad hoc board when required. But I dealt directly with the minister at that time, and he set the allowance pension payable for them, and I think it was paid for them, recorded it in the...
For how many years were you involved with that fund?
until I left in June... The
88.
act was enacted on the 31st of October 1977.
Yeah.
And when I left in June, I handed over,
77 to 88.
yeah.
So you were there for 10 years.
No, I was in the Ministry of Public Administration at that time, and then moved to the Ministry of Education.
But you still had to do with the...
Yeah, I had to do it, you know.
Now, sorry.
You said earlier that it was you left in 1980 to move to the Ministry of Education, or
No, it doesn't matter whether, because I was still doing this liberation...
even when you moved to the Ministry of Education,
Yes, yes.
you were still doing
Yeah,
that
and
because
even-
it was still under Minister
You see,
Michel.
Michel was also the minister.
Yes.
Moved to the Minister of
Of Education
Yeah, I
then.
was doing it, yes, in the Ministry of
Okay.
Education, yeah.
So it was until 1988.
Yes, but then it was transferred to the Ministry of Finance. And have you made inquiries in the Ministry of Finance? Mr. Changleng was handling that.
Mr. Changleng.
Al Changleng.
Al Changleng or
Al
Francis
Changleng.
Changleng? Al
Because,
Changleng.
because he phoned me one or two twice to discuss the matter.
Yeah, I know him.
You know, Mr. Changleng at one time he was the Accountant General.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Changleng may have handed over to another Mr. Changleng, but I can't tell you this is...
The other Mr. Changleng, who was the
Yeah.
governor of the central bank.
yes, I don't know that one, because I dealt with...
Now, during those years when you were de facto secretary of that board, were the accounts ever, was that fund ever audited?
At that time, we had the account. I don't remember. I don't remember. But we had kept the account, recorded all payments in a ledger.
Who was the accounting officer for that fund?
No, in fact, as I tell you, I was asked to help with the management. In fact, I did the account as well.
And over the years, it seemed that more people came to be beneficiaries of that fund. It ended up having a broader purpose. I mean, the list of names we saw of beneficiaries were people that were not actually named in the fund.
No, at that time, my time, when I was dealing with it, they were only the benefit of the children and spouse. That is the children of Mr. Lalonde, the wife of Francis Russell and Roseline, and then the daughters of Mr. Changhim.
I mean, because now there are additional names on it, and I think we sort of understood it's turned into some sort of compensation fund for people that are injured in the military.
Well, I don't know about this one, but I know that the Act has not been amended to provide for that.
That's what we thought. We thought it hadn't been amended.
I don't know.
but
During my time,
yeah.
it was simply the person, the children who were dependent on the four of them there, Mr. Changsim, Mr. Rachel, and Mr. Lalonde, and Mr. Jani.
Because there really shouldn't be any dependent children now, right?
Oh, well, yeah, up to 18,
Yeah.
I think by
Yeah.
that time.
Because we're talking about 40 years ago,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
But there's
until the
quite a
age of
list
18.
of names.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
until the age of 18.
What sort of monies were being transferred from the SPDF to that fund?
At that time, I would say about 400,000 rupees, 380. You see, when we pay, because they use, I think, I remember they had the fund they obtained from the fees and fine of disciplinary measures of army personnel. These funds, they were transferred to us. When we need the money, it transferred to us. But I think it was at that time, it was in the region, about 480,000, to be able to get the interest required to pay the, as long as the fund was enough to get the annual interest to be able to pay the pension.
Well,
As more people come in, then they had to, obviously, they had to increase the fund.
but whilst you were there, what was the highest sort of balance at any one
About
time?
480,000 rupees at the time.
And that's all, it stayed at around that level?
Yeah.
So there were no new fines coming in every month?
No, I mean, I remember first we got some money. Then when we invest, the interest was not enough to pay for the pension. We had to increase it, then we asked for some money. But all this, I asked the minister, look, it looks as if we will not have enough money. But once you've got the amount invested and the interest accrued is enough to pay the pension. Unless you increase the pension, then you would need more money.
Well, the point I was going to make, were the pensions increased since the children were small, as they grew up and they got,
Yeah.
the pension was increased annually, every 2 years, every 5 years, or it just stayed static?
No, I remember there was a sunset. Yeah, and then I don't remember an increase. It may have been done later, but I don't remember an increase. So,
Was any money transferred from the consolidated fund?
no.
No money?
No, there was no money from the government at that time. It was all through public donation and from... there was an appeal after the 5th of June, I think, for people to donate money for this, to help those children and wife of the 4 there who lost their life. And the donation made all this together, and then some money was transferred from the SPDF.
C'est Confait. When you say donors, can you recall if they were international donors?
No international. Local people giving 20, 50, 30 rupees, 100 rupees at the time. No international.
Correct me if I'm wrong, on the management on that fund, it appears to my knowledge that you were the facto secretary, so you're not so involved in the decision-making process. You're just executing, am I right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I received, as I understand, the chairman of that fund was Minister Michel at that time. And I received instruction from him from the very beginning, help to set up, to administer the fund, get all the beneficiaries, submit to him, Then the pension to be paid was decided by him, probably after discussion with the board, because he was the chairman, and then payment of the pension.
Board of 3 members.
No, I didn't see the board of 3 members. I dealt with specifically
The chairman.
the chairman. Yeah.
And there was no proper auditing system also.
There was, I think, auditing, but I don't recall at that time, who audited it. I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, even if the youngest child, was 1 year old then or whatever, or by now that fund should have become redundant.
Even when they reached the age of 18 or 19, depending on whether they were at school at that time, yeah.
By now,
But
they've all past 18.
if you look really at the objective of the fund, then yes.
Are you not surprised that the fund is still operating?
I've heard about it, yeah, but I'm not sure.
Mr. Simeon told us it's still operating. Would you know if if Anne Roselyn is still alive?
No,
No.
passed away some years.
So would there be any survivors from the original beneficiaries?
Yeah, there should be. Yeah, there should be.
Was that fund supposed to carry on through several generations?
No, a trust fund was set up, and it was for the maintenance of the children and the spouse.
And
When the children reach the age of 18, they are working, so the pension ceases.
And what happens when the widow passes away?
Yeah, it's the same.
So it should not carry on to the children
No, you
of the
can't.
widow or the grandchildren?
No, that's not possible. Otherwise, you will never finish with it, no?
Well, you've told us some interesting things.
Yeah.
You've told us that, to your knowledge, the Act has not been amended.
No,
To
I'm trying. I've looked at it, but it doesn't seem to have been amended. No, try and look at SEYCHELLES and see if
We will try that.
try SEYCHELLES, but cap 110.
I went there, it's not amended.
Not amended,
I
yeah.
checked.
Now, the second thing is that the fund was for the maintenance of the children
Yeah,
until they became adults.
yeah. It doesn't say in the act until but children normally up to 18, then you're no longer children.
When you're an
Child.
adult, you're not a child,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you don't benefit
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
So theoretically, that fund should have
Yes, if the act has not been
amended,
amended, that fund should,
should be closed
yeah, redundant.
since a long time now.
Yeah. There must have been
No, we had Mr. Simeon here telling us it's still working, it's still operating.
I don't know.
Okay.
So try and get the records and see who are getting the pension.
I think we'll have to ask you for your help now and then, just to give us an idea of where we could find the files and the records.
It was with the Ministry of Finance.
We will. And thank you for that information, because we have been trying to
File
find.
about that size and a ledger which records all the payment.
And when you made the payments, you recorded
Yes.
why they were made?
No, it's a pension, it's established. Then you pay every...
So whilst you were there, it was only the children and the widows who were paid.
children. I don't know if Mr. Lalonde, Mrs. Lalonde is still around, I don't know. She was getting,
Yeah.
in support of of her child, I think Steve Lalonde, who's now working overseas, I think. Yeah. So you may be able to find out if they were living at Belair there, at shop at Belair there. And who else? And then probably the children, they don't remember because the payment were made to their mother for the support, because children pension, you don't pay to them directly. You pay to
One of the reasons why Dorothy Shang Him was so, convinced that her mother never received anything is because the fund mentions payment of their education, but she says her mother paid for her education.
It was not. Although the Act says payment for education and maintenance, they were given a fixed amount per month for their upkeep, which includes some for education.
Okay, so not a separate payment for...
No. They were not given an education allowance as such.
Well, Mr. Confait, I was just checking my notes back on when we talked to Mr. Marcus Simeon, and he said he thought that this act had been extended by an SI, by a statutory instrument, to include other members of families within the military service.
No, but I don't know. When you look at SEYCHELLES, when you look at SEYCHELLES' website, it says clearly no substitute legislation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If it was extended, surely it should have been a regulation.
Mm.
But
Okay.
Did he provide you with a copy of the regulation?
No. He said he had very little documentation on the account, but
In fact, I don't think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think they can do it by regulation. They have to amend the Act.
mm-hmm. And that the money
Because
had
it's-
come from the Social Security Fund.
They have to amend the Act because the object of the Act, which would be changed.
They might as well just make a new law, right?
Yeah. You are clear or you're still in the dark?
Yeah.
Clearer or still in the dark?
Well, I mean, a lot clearer. You've been really helpful. You've obviously had a very long career with the government. So we're grateful to you for the information you've provided in relation to case 006, case 002, and case 001. And we thank you for the tips on where we can find the files. Very difficult to find files in the Seychelles. Is there anything else you would like to say to the Commission before we say goodbye?
No, I think I've said enough. No, I just hope that whatever I've said, I've helped to you.
Yeah, you've been very helpful.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for
Yeah.
coming voluntarily
Okay,
and for being
okay.
willing to speak in public. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, and I hope that everyone appreciates the evidence that you've given us today. It's very helpful, and we really appreciate it, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And all the best.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that concludes our session for today, and we will reconvene on Monday morning at 9:30, unfortunately, because our first witness cannot make 9 o'clock, and that will be Mr. Bernard Georges, who will talk to us with respect to case 002 on detention orders, presidential decrees detaining people, and on 003 in relation to the land claim of Mr. August as he represented him in court proceedings. So thank you very much, and we are adjourned.
All rise.